With the announcement a few days ago of the new Black Library novel Archmagos by Guy Haley, I wanted to take a few minutes to share some of my spitballing and my speculations for the upcoming novel, what it might mean for the lore. We'll be talking about everything from resurrecting Horus Heresy heretics to Chaos Primaris Space Marines, from Enslavers and the return of the old ones to Cawl's upcoming showdown with Vashtorr, and way more. First off, I want to talk about how some of the key plot lines were left off at the end of Genefather, and then we'll jump over to the Warhammer community website and read the official synopsis that we've been given and use that as a segue into my speculations, my spitballing, what I think it could mean for the lore. Of course, everything here is just pure speculation. These are based on my opinions, my biases, and just generally what I think of the lore, so take it with a grain of salt, and I'm always keen for debate and challenge and trying to explore things from different perspectives, so please do share your thoughts in the comments below. So first things first, let's think about where Genefather left off and maybe what some of the bigger points there are. In my opinion. One of the key plot lines, of course, is Cawl setting up to achieve his great work, or at least begin upon it. His great work being the creation of an Imperium-controlled Blackstone pylon network, with the ultimate aim of sealing the warp-off from the Materium. But in this initial phase anyway, the first step is to turn the Attilan Gap into a safe haven of travel between Imperium Nihilus and the original Imperium. And for context, the Attilan Gap is like a small corridor through the Great Rift, however at the moment it's assailed by Chaos forces on all sides constantly, and so it's not very safe at all. Now, the next step in his great work is going to the ancient Necron planet of Irtanathep, which actually sits on the event horizon of a black hole known as the Caligan's Maw. The reasoning for going to Irtanathep is twofold. Firstly, it's believed to hold a control module or something that actually allowed the Necrons back in the day to control the Blackstone Pylon network, or would do. And so Cawl wants to take control of that, or seize it, find it, whatever, so that he can try and use it at least as a control unit for the pylons around the Cadian Rift area. But more than that, it's also believed that due to it being on the event horizon of the black hole, time has been grossly distorted on Irtanathep for more than millennia upon millennia. It's believed that it might still be as it was some 60 million years in the past when the old ones still walked the galaxy. And we'll dig into that a little bit later. Another key open plotline, in my opinion, is Fabius Bile's gifting of the Chaos Android to the Disciples of Null. The Chaos Android is an ancient device which Fabius Bile discovered or found and gifted to the Disciples of Null. Its purpose is to serve as a conduit and a shell, typically for a demon to inhabit and come and act in the Materium. However, he gifted this to the Disciples of Null. The Disciples of Null are a cult within the Dark Mechanicus, and they worship or venerate Sota-Nul, an ancient data heretic born and existing and operating within the Horus Heresy period, and she serves essentially as their patron saint. But we'll get into why that's relevant later. Another utterly critical open plotline here is Fabius Bile's stealing of Alpha Primus's Geneseed, or critically his progenoid glands, at the end of Genefather. And the idea of Chaos Primaris Space Marines is addressed directly by Belisarius Cawl during that book in his conversation with Fabius Bile. Another big what if. Another part of the plot that I think we'll see explored more was Cawl gearing up for time travel. Cawl rescued a Necron chronomancer from an Inquisition prison with the aim of having her team up with him and support in his temporal engineering. Another key part of that plotline was Cawl convening the Conclave Chronalis. 3 different Forge Worlds sent representatives to hear out Cawl's wacky and zany plans, and 2 of them decided to help. But crucially, all 3 of those had expert temporal engineers represent part of their faction at the Conclave. So Cawl, again, building a team who are experts in manipulation of time. Another area that was expanded upon in Genefather is Cawl's potential hereticness, for lack of a better word. Heresy. Heretexy, whatever you want to call it. Whatever you want to call it. Anyway. So with things like the Guilliman Inferior, the Cawl Inferior, as well as, of course, Cuvo, now Cuvo 89, and then even one of the Castellans aboard the Zarquesitor, that's Cawl's flagship, is suspiciously sentient. And so I think that we see Cawl, as we always do, treading the line of tech heresy. Particularly as many within the Adeptus Mechanicus are not fans of Cawl's innovations and discoveries, no matter how he might argue as them not being invention. So as I see it, those are some of the key open-ended plot areas that we'll see expanded upon or explored further in Archmagos. Before we dig into any speculation though, let's jump over to the Warhammer community website and I'll read to you the actual synopsis and what we have to work with so far. This latest tale focuses on Cawl's continued efforts to stabilize the Attilan Gap at the order of Rabute Guilliman, to provide another potentially functional route for crossing the Great Rift. In order to put his latest great work into action, he requires one last item, a series of control codes preserved on an ancient Necron world. The hitch is that this planet is trapped on the event horizon of a black hole, increasing the risk substantially even after factoring in the residents. To achieve this mission, Cawl will need to call on recruits from across the Adeptus Mechanicus, and to make matters even worse, the Archmagos' meddlings in matters best left untouched have piqued the attention of a like-minded but altogether more malicious artificer. And rumors abound that Vashtorr the Archifane is on the move. So, that's what we have to work with from the Warhammer community website, but I think that there's a lot there that we can dig into. First and biggest thing that pops out to me is Vashtorr. Vashtorr is coming back, baby. For those of you who aren't familiar, Vashtorr the Archifane, Lord and Overruler of the Forge of Souls, essentially the premier arms dealer for the Chaos Gods. Vashtorr was last seen in the series Arcs of Omen, where he was helping Abaddon by actually building the quote-unquote Arcs of Omen, adapted space hulks. Interestingly, and some connections that we can start to infer there are, a big part of what Vashtorr was doing in Arcs of Omen was looking for fragments of the key, and he wanted to use the key to open the lock to get the weapon. I mean, I feel like they kind of slacked a little bit on the naming on this part, but regardless, we don't know a great deal about the key, the lock, and the weapon. We know that Vashtorr has succeeded in rebuilding or refashioning the key, but all that we really know about them are these things, which are the key itself was made up of tons of eclectic and esoteric fragments, from huge pillars to metallic spheres, etc., etc., etc. It's, don't think of a key literally in how it looks, but think about a key more metaphorically in terms of what it achieves by opening a lock. We know that the key, the lock, and the weapon are supposedly Old One technology, which will come important later on. The only other thing that we really know is Abaddon tells some of his followers that when they get the weapon, it will make the people of the Imperium, the citizens, and the Space Marines look like even greater traitors than the Chaos Space Marines. I've got a few ideas of what that could mean, but that's way off in left field, so we'll get into that a little bit later. But interestingly again, Vashtorr is coming back, and that sets up this great sort of antithesis, antagonist-protagonist duo between Belisarius, the great creator of the Imperium, and Vashtorr, the great creator of the Immaterium. Interestingly as well, if Vashtorr is going to be the primary antagonist to Cawl's protagonism, Vashtorr is Chaos Undivided. He doesn't give allegiance to any of the different Chaos Gods, and in fact, for those that serve Vashtorr in the cult of the Archifane, essentially his own army, one of the 3 oaths that they have to take is should any of the Chaos Gods try and invade the Forge of Souls and take over, those demons will actually discard their old allegiances and defend Vashtorr and help, fight off the encroaching Chaos God, whoever it might be. But anyway, Vashtorr is Chaos Undivided, and so I think that opens a few potential avenues that things could go. And so let's get into actually spitballing, speculating, chatting shit, for lack of a better term. I'm not going to be right on everything. These are just my ideas, but let's get into it. So let's start off focusing on the main character, Belisarius Cawl. I think first and foremost, one of the easiest things we can expect and almost guarantee is Cawl is going to uncover some absolutely zany Necron or even Old One tech on Irtonathep when he gets there. The planet is meant to be essentially suspended in a time stasis, as if it were 60 million years in the past, and we know that it was inhabited by, I think it's even still inhabited by Necrons, which also opens an interesting question of, have these Necrons been there the whole time? Did they ever go into the Great Sleep? Why didn't they leave Irtonathep if so? Yeah, so interestingly, I think that Cawl will uncover and try and integrate some Necron or Old One tech into Imperium tech, i.e. into his fledgling Blackstone pylon network, so that he can use those aforementioned control codes as a control system for the pylons and try and do something effective. Probably not seal off the Great Rift, but at the very least, turn the Atlan Gap into a safe bridge. But I think some of the challenges that Cawl is likely to face in this book are the increasing calls for him to be identified as a heretic. Back in Genefather, we see, and let me consult my cue card here, because this guy's name is terrible. We see Frank Gamma 87 Nu 3 Psi actually petitioning the Conclave Cronalis initially to recognize Cawl as a heretic. And he's not entirely successful. The Conclave, ultimately 2 of the 3 planets support Cawl, but some of the interesting developments off the back of the Conclave going against Cawl's favor, Forge World Metallica, sick name, decides to assist Frank in petitioning Mars, A, to recognize Cawl as a heretic, and then B, to actually strip him of his title as a prime conduit of the Omnissiah. So I think Cawl is going to continue, somebody might uncover the Guilliman Inferior or the Cawl Inferior, probably not the Guilliman Inferior because it is very tightly sealed. In fact, both of them are very tightly sealed. But there's just too much, there's Cuvo as well. Cawl, in my opinion, is just obsessed with AI, or at least creating things that he can say are not AI, even though they absolutely are. And I mean, Cuvo 89, which is the most recent iteration of Cuvo. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Cuvo is essentially a AI simulacrum of one of Cawl's best friends way, way back in the Great Crusade. Cawl, again, always attests that it's not a true AI, and in fact, Cuvo, each Cuvo asserts that they're not the original Cuvo, a guy called Frederick, or Friedrich, I should say. All of the Cuvos assert that they're not this old guy, and also that they're not true AI, but it's getting a little sussy, Belisarius. Belisussius, that's what we're going to call you from now on. So Belisus, I think people are just going to keep digging into his, tech heresy, and I struggle to see Mars fully supporting them, but this opens the doors for another rift, right? Another rift in the Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, tying that in with another interesting thing and speculating again is the return of Sota-Nul. Again, Sota-Nul was a heretic who operated. She was, I think, the most experienced and highest ranking disciple of Kelbor Hall. Famously, Kelbor Hall was the guy who created or caused the schism in the Adeptus Mechanicus back in the Great Crusade because Kelbor Hall decided to side with Horus. Anyway, Sota-Nul was Kelbor's foremost disciple, highest ranked, most experienced, most powerful, whatever. And Sota-Nul is ultimately the patron, I want to say patron saint, but if you're a heretic, is it like patron demon? But anyway, the disciples of Null sect, who Fabius Bile gave the Chaos Android to, are planning to use the Chaos Android to resurrect Sota-Nul. But why is this relevant in relation to Cawl? Well, they actually met way back during the Great Crusade, during the Horus Heresy. So Sota-Nul went to the planet in the Trisolian system, and I think I'm remembering these correctly. Sota-Nul went to the planet in the Trisolian system where critically Belisarius Cawl, although much younger and less powerful within the Adeptus Mechanicus, Belisarius Cawl was operating as a part of the Adeptus Mechanicus forces there, as was his old friend Friedrich. So Sota-Nul knows Cawl, and she also presumably had met Friedrich, who is now Cuvo, in the past. So a couple of tangents from that. Firstly, could Cawl be inspired by the Chaos Android and actually think, is this a good way to get Friedrich back on board in a real way? Hopefully not, but possibly. We all know he doesn't mind a little tech heresy. But also, is there going to be some sort of exposure there? Could the resurrection of Sota-Nul end up with her exposing Cawl? Because maybe she'll recognize Cuvo and be like, I understand how Cawl's alive, you're not alive. And also, I think it just sets up another 10,000-year-old rivalry. Ultimately, the Adeptus Mechanicus forces that Cawl was a part of didn't surrender, and they weren't completely destroyed as Cawl survived, although I think he was one of the few survivors. So I just think that the disciples of Sota-Nul, the resurrection of Sota-Nul, and her former interactions with Cawl are going to set up a bit of a shit show for him. But let's see. So that's one of the interesting things that I've been thinking about. So just another couple points around Cawl and some potential, albeit quite left field, developments I think we could see, keen for your thoughts on these, are firstly, expanded Necron Imperial relations. And so we've seen Cawl in the past successfully and actually comment that he likes Trazyn the Infinite, being a great conversationalist and someone who supported the Imperial cause. Then, of course, in Genefather, he tries to recruit the Chronomancer that he has saved from the Inquisition, albeit she declines and she says that Trazyn is essentially a schmuck and he is afflicted by compassion or something to that ilk. But Cawl already has a small track record of succeeding in developing relations with the Necrons. We know he's going to an ancient Necron world, and if he's going to a Necron world that has Necrons that are trapped 60 million years in the past, perhaps they've got a different mindset towards the galaxy than the Necrons of today. Back when 60 million years ago, I think we were just Monkey, like pure Monkey back then. And so nobody was really thinking of us as anything. So maybe we'll be able to get away with being a bit different. We can maybe Cawl can sell the idea that we're all buddies in Old One's arms. So I'm curious to see where they might go in terms of the relationship between the Imperium and the Necrons. Now, let's talk about Alpha Primus, let's talk about Geneseed, let's talk about Enslavers, potentially. Let's see. So first off, Primus and his Geneseed. We know that Fabius Bile jacked his progenoid glands toward the end of Genefather. Thus, he actually has access to the Geneseed of all 20 Primarchs, or 21, or 19, or 7003, however many you want to say. Let's call it 20 for ease today. Cawl now has the Geneseed of all 20 Primarchs, right? And there's a few things that he could do with this. We have already seen, and Cawl has already said, that he has cloned all of the Primarchs. Hypothetically, I think prior to this, he could not have cloned the two lost Primarchs. I can't think of any mention of him having their Geneseed, and I can't think of how he would have done it without it. However, now he does. So he's already tried cloning the other 18/19, we're calling it 18 today. Why wouldn't he at least give a try to these new two? He's got access to their genetic material. I don't know. I mean, this could be a cheeky little way of the Black Library bringing back or bringing in some Lost Legion lore. Please, God, Omnissiah, great Emperor, please. But, so I think that that's one avenue. I think that a more likely outcome of what he'll try and do, Abaddon has asked Fabius Bile to try and actually make some Chaos Primaris Marines, so he's almost essentially definitely going to do that. But we also can't forget about Fabius Bile's new men, or Newmen, whatever you want to call them. And I think the only one we know about in Genefather is Porter, the female Newman. But now that he's got access to all of this juiced up Geneseed, which he didn't have before, particularly direct Primarch Geneseed rather than taken from Astartes who have other Astartes Geneseed, the diluted stuff. He's got the real Kool-Aid, like pure Kool-Aid, not mixed with any water, just pure liquid Kool-Aid. I don't know how he got it. But anyway, so if he's got that good shit, I could see him integrating it into Porter, at least, because we know she survived, and trying to make Porter into a counter Primus, maybe, but definitely Primaris Chaos Space Marines, I think, are a undoubtable likelihood. Whether we'll see them in Archmagos or not, I don't know. I don't think Bile will have much or any of a role there, aside from the knock-on effects of some of the stuff he did in Genefather. But he might do. I suspect he'll probably have a minor few cameos or something like that. But not getting too far down a tangent away from Alpha Primus, one of the really interesting things I think that we might see, and why I mention Alpha again, is Enslavers. Now, why Enslavers? In the book To Speak as One, Belisarius Cawl actually sends Alpha Primus to retrieve the corpse of an Inquisitor who has been in a Necron prison. Now, why is that relevant? Two things. When Primus actually goes to retrieve the corpse in the prison, he notices something devouring it or leeching off of it that looks Belisariously like an enslaver. It's not confirmed to have been so, but it does look a lot like one. And to tie that in, if they're going to a planet that A, rampant with Old One tech, B, trapped in time for some 60 million years, way back then, the Chaos Gods weren't a thing, and the Enslavers really were the primary force or primary risk coming out of the Immaterium. So with Irtonathep being on that event horizon, being trapped in time, maybe we'll bump into Enslavers, and maybe they'll use, maybe Guy Haley will use the book Archmagos as an opportunity to really expand on some of that ancient lore, the Old Ones, the Enslavers, etc. I also think generally we'll see the sort of mystery of Alpha Primus continue to be revealed, more insight into who and what he is. Cawl does refer to Alpha Primus at the end of Genefather as his son, and I think that's done more metaphorically and more just to make Fabius Bile not kill him, rather than him actually being any sort of biological son of Belisarius. But I think that we will see Primus's, particularly how the Geneseed affects him, how his different powers, how he wars with them, the constant struggles that he has, we'll see those come into further play and explored more. So let's talk about Vashtorr versus Bile and Chaos Undivided. Vashtorr is going to be a central and super critical character in this arc of the story. Forgive the pun. What do we know? We know that the key is complete and he's now off searching for the lock. And so particularly if he's going, we know that the key, the lock, and the weapon are Old One tech. If he's going to the planet of Irtonathep, which presumably he will do, if that's where, most of the book is going to be centered, he's going to a hotbed of Old One tech. And so is he going to actually find the lock there? Is he going to be able to use the key to open the lock and get the weapon? Terrible names, God. I think it's quite possible. I think it's interesting that the key antagonist in this book is going to be coming from Chaos Undivided rather than elsewhere. So could we see maybe I think we'll definitely see some Iron Warriors getting involved. That would be dope. Vashtorr being the guy who makes all the demon engines, or at least, the Cult of the Archphane are the people that make all of the demon engines. And of course, Iron Warriors being the chaos equivalent of the Iron Hands and how much they love tech. But also word bearers, potentially. I could see this as an opportunity for them to really explore more into how Lorgar and the word bearers are making their way back into the lore. We kind of know Lorgar is waking up from his 10,000 year meditation. We know that he's going to start getting more involved, or we think so anyway, from a lot of the stuff that's been hinted. And what I'm really curious about Lorgar, and this is more speculation, is has Lorgar mastered the Annuncia, right? I think that's one of the biggest what-ifs of the Chaos Primarchs at the moment. Because if Lorgar is an Annuncia bad man, then I think his power level has essentially jumped above all the rest of the Chaos Primarchs. But let's see. Potential. But I suppose maybe the most substantial thing that we can expect is the Vashtorr versus Cawl showdown, right? Both great creators of their respective factions. Vashtorr, of course, being, a greater demon, makes all of the soul grinders, essentially makes all the bad boy weaponry that the forces of chaos use. Belisarius Cawl, of course, being the equivalent for the Imperium, having just created the Primaris Marines, as well as, to his own admission, a whole suite of weaponry, transports, vehicles, etc. to support them. So I think that we're definitely going to see this head-to-head make-off, even, maybe. That would be quite cool. There's definitely going to be a big intellectual debate between the two of them, a la what we saw between Fabius Bile and Belisarius Cawl and Genefather. There's definitely going to have, and also between Belisarius Cawl and the Shard of the Catan also. So I think that we're going to see another great battle of the wits, but I'd love to see a battle of creation. I don't know if you've ever watched a show called Forged in Fire, really nerdy. It's all about blacksmithing, and it's like almost an Iron Chef style blacksmithing show. They get a few blacksmiths together, they've got a few hours to complete a challenge, and they got to make the best thing that they can within the time. I'd love to see a Belisarius Cawl Vashtorr Forged in Fire special, essentially, in Archmagos, where I don't know how, maybe because of the time dilation, there's going to be some weird race against time where they're both on the planet, they're both trying to make something, maybe to access those codes or to access the lock and the weapon within a certain time frame, and they're kind of madly frenzied mechanics, just going nuts, building stuff. I don't know. That's what I think and would like to see, but I think that it sets up a really good counterpoint between the antagonist and the protagonist, as we've already had between Bile and Cawl. But I think that potentially, Vashtorr, in terms of his underlying mindset, is more a similar creator to Cawl than Fabius Bile is. Fabius Bile calls Cawl a generalist, which Cawl kind of accepts in Genefather, and I would argue Vashtorr too is a generalist. So I think that their minds are on a closer wavelength than Fabius Bile and Cawl were. And so that just really excites me and interests me in terms of how they might interact with one another. They might see similarities in one another, but at the end of the day, obviously they will. I hope anyway. I don't hope Cawl goes to heresy. They'll face off and something big will happen, but to be decided. But also there is some historic context or historic precedence of maybe why Vashtorr might already know about Cawl and dislike him. Back in Genefather, a Lord Discordant, which is essentially a master of chaos engines, of demon engines, right? Usually a chaos space marine. A Lord Discordant invades the Pontus Arvernus, which is where the different Mechanicum Forge worlds have gathered for the Conclave Cronalis. When the Lord Discordant invaded that, he tried to kill a couple of the Chaos Knights that were actually in the service of Belisarius Cawl, and they defeated him and banished him back to the warp. So I'm wondering if this Lord Discordant has gone and had words with Vashtorr and been like, you gotta look out for Belisarius, alright, he's coming for your cheeks. Maybe, potentially. But I think, again, another tangential connection that we might see expanded on, and that I'd be quite interested to hear more about personally. I'm going to start to tie it out there, and so a very quick thank you for listening and thinking along with me. I love to be challenged, I love debate, and I love wacky, zany ideas, so please do share them and let's chat shit in the comments together. And a quick note, if this is your first time watching my channel, welcome and thank you for joining. I'm Nevan Pettigrew, I am the creator of AstartesAssemble, and this channel exists for a couple of reasons. I post a video every single day, and I will continue to do so until I'm cast in the Warhammer 40,000 cinematic universe. That's the ultimate goal of this channel, but along the way, and even after we achieve the goal, I plan to entertain you with tons of lore content, memes, chatting shit, but really the thing I love to make the most are lore narratives, or even where I try and do some vocal acting for that. So please, go check those out. Otherwise, Thank you for watching, look after yourself, and remember, Melior Imperator!